An evil entity haunts a family in a house built next to a cemetery. Hi, welcome to another episode of Chronicles of the Unexplained podcast. My name is Judith Trahan. Today, I'm going to share a story that I experienced in my childhood and adolescence. It's a house where I grew up. When I was about 5 years old, we moved into this house, my parents and my little sister who was months old and me. The events happened over the course of about 10 years. To give you all a little bit of context, it is said that usually where most paranormal events occur, it's in the old houses, since they keep a lot of history and are somehow trapped energies. But in this case, the house was new. It was built by my parents. For me, it was a big house, although it had only 3 bedrooms. It had a long corridor and the living room and dining room were very spacious. It was a normal and ordinary house with the only peculiarity that it was next to a cemetery. My maternal grandmother lived with us for some time since my mom worked and she was the only who took care of us. My dad, most of his life was an atheist, and when I say was, is because today his perspective changed, since he now accepts that there is an almighty and supreme being who is governed outside of all scientific explanation. He had to experience in his own flesh an event that would change his life forever. But I'll tell you about that in another episode. Going back to this story, my dad had a very strong temper. Well, he still has it, but back then when he heard that my grandmother referred to God with the very common phrase that those of us who do believe in Him have. When we make a plan, we do affirm or we do say the following: see you next weekend, God willing. My dad used to say, no, if I want it, and he used to firmly repeat the phrase in a strong way. Obviously, by not believing in God, he didn't believe in evil either. He said that those things didn't exist and that they were only inventions. To such an extent that he himself told us one day that he had gone to the cemetery and that he had challenged the devil. He called him, telling that if he existed, he should appear to him right there, that he would give him a test at that precise moment. But nothing happened. Well, that's what he said. After all we experienced in that house, I have my doubts. My maternal grandmother was a devoted Catholic, and since she lived with us, our traditions were based on Catholicism, even though my dad was always opposed. My little sister, at the age of about 2 or 3 years old, used to play and talk with an imaginary friend. At that time, we didn't give it too much thought. It's common for children to do that. For us, it was normal, except for my grandma, since she said that imaginary friend was a goblin, that she saw him playing and jumping on one foot in the living room of the house in broad daylight. I never saw this being, but I remember very well that I saw my little sister playing. She talked and acted as if someone was with her. The house had a very large window in the living room. She used to get tangled up in the curtains. These were long to the floor. I remember that there was a rocking chair and always saw her moving. As I mentioned earlier, my little sister used to run and play in that area, right there where my grandmother said she used to see the goblin often jumping and playing. When my mom asked her what he was look like, my grandma described him as a small childlike being and that she could see him from the corner of her eye. She could watch him jump and turn on one foot and spin. She turned straight on to see him and he vanished. One day, one of my uncles came to the house to visit. It was night and I remember well that we were already asleep. I was with my grandmother in one bed and my uncle in another. I remember that my grandmother always slept with the light on, and I have always had light sleep. I woke up with anything. That day, we were asleep, and suddenly I felt my grandma gets out of bed in a very hasty way, and at the same time, I see my uncle who jumps out of bed with a scared face. I was scared too, because I didn't know what was happening. The first thing that crossed my mind was that perhaps they had seen a scorpion, since I was terrified of scorpions and in that area where we lived there were many. My uncle couldn't even talk about how scared he was, but he said that someone had grabbed his feet, that he clearly felt hands that had grabbed his ankles. My grandma, like him, looked scared, and it was difficult to see her like that since she was a very strong woman. My uncle was screaming,
There is something, they grabbed my feet. A hand grabbed my feet.
I was scared when I heard that. My grandma grabbed the rosary and began to pray. We began to pray together with her until we fell asleep. I remember well that after that episode, I panicked. All night long, couldn't sleep, and didn't dare to go to the bathroom since I had to cross a long and dark corridor. The next day, no one mentioned anything about what happened, but eventually one day I heard my grandma say that she had also had her feet grabbed. She had felt the same as my uncle felt. Afterwards, my uncle never wanted to be alone in that house. If he arrived and there was no one there, he would sit outside to wait for us to arrive. He would say that he wouldn't go in because he said that he saw a shadow figure from the bathroom to the hallway. Another strange event that I experienced was something similar to the so-called sleep paralysis. While I was in bed, I remember that I woke up in the middle of the night. I was in my parents' master bedroom. I have no memory if my grandma was with me or my mom. I only remembered very well that the bathroom door was wide open. This bathroom had two doors, one through which it could be accessed from the bedroom, and another one that led to the hallway that was usually where my sister and I entered. That day, I don't know why, I was in my parents' bedroom. I was asleep on my side, looking towards the bathroom. When I opened my eyes, I didn't see anything out of the ordinary, except that when I looked towards the bathroom, I began to get very scared. I can't explain why since the light was on. I stared at the bathtub and for any reason I started to feel a terrible panic. I remember that I wanted to get up to close the door, but I couldn't move. I knew it was not a dream. I was completely awake and I couldn't move or turn around. I wanted to wake up my mom or my grandma or whoever had been there with me. I wanted to tell her that I was scared, but I never couldn't. The hours passed until dawn. I don't really know how long I was like this. Maybe it was a while, but it seemed like an eternity to me. My grandma experienced many very horrifying events. She not only used to see things, but also experienced events where she felt those presence that haunted her all her life. And not only in that house, but in others. I will tell you all in other episodes. As I mentioned before, the house was located next to a cemetery. The neighbors used to hear at night that somebody knocked very hard at the door of my house, and they used to ask my mom what had happened. But my mom said that she never heard anything. There were several incidents that the neighbors reported hearing noises, screams, and doors slamming. I wonder if those sounds came from inside of my house when there was no one, since we never heard anything. At least, I don't remember hearing such knocks. Another thing that I managed to experience while living there was that one day at about 9 p.m., We were watching TV and the power went out. My sister and I shared a bedroom. We had twin beds. It was so dark that you couldn't see anything. So we decided to go to sleep. There was total silence and darkness. We were trying to sleep when suddenly I felt someone sat at the foot of my bed. The first thing I thought was that it was my sister, that she was afraid and wanted to sleep with me. When I asked her what was happening, I expected to hear her voice right there next to me, but she screamed at my mom. She jumped out of her bed, terrified. I was panicked because that's when I realized that she hadn't sat at the foot of my bed. She had been in hers all the time, and she felt the same as I felt at the same time. Somebody sat or something had sat in our beds. My mom came and told us it was her. She thought we were asleep together, but we knew it wasn't like that. I was about 10 years old and my sister was 5, and we hadn't been baptized. One day, my grandma told my mom that she had seen a presence, that she recommended that we be baptized immediately. When my mom asked her what she had seen, my grandma said, "It's something very, very bad. I'm not going to tell you exactly what I saw, but it's something really, really bad." My grandma had taught me to pray and say that praying to the Virgin Mary was the only way to keep the devil away. She told me one day that she had seen him, that he was on the roof of the house watching, and that he had appeared to her as a very handsome man, very well dressed. I was very scared. I remember at that time there was a soap opera in Mexico that was broadcast on Channel 2 called El Maleficio, that could be translated as The Curse. I used to watch it sometimes. There was an episode that I will never forget. It got engraved on my memory until these days. There was a scene where there was a large photograph with a man who was dressed in black, had a mustache and wore a very elegant suit. Next to that photo, some black candles, and the actor Ernesto Alonso invoked him. The man in the photograph was the devil, and that's exactly how I imagined him, with that piercing gaze. When I was 12 or 13 years old, I decided to enroll in catechism. The strange thing is that I don't know why I chose a church very far away from my house. The church El Santuario, the sanctuary. I think I did it with the desire to offer God something that in some way was like a sacrifice, because I had to go all the Sundays and had to walk long distance to attend. I remember perfectly well that I only missed one Sunday because I felt a little bit sick. I still don't know clearly why I made that decision. If it was because my friends had already made their first communion because of the soap opera, or because what my grandma had told me what she had seen. I think God already had a plan for me. In that house, there was something very malevolent. My dad had very extreme behaviors. It was as if he had two personalities. There were days when everything was honey on flakes. Then other days he was the most violent person, to such a degree that he beat my poor mom to the point of sending her to the hospital. There was a lot of physical and psychological violence. So I have no doubt that the evil one was haunting our house. A cousin of mine says he saw a being without feet, floating with a long black robe that appeared at the end of the corridor, right at the bathroom door, and he says that he saw it only when the house was dark. My cousin says that the first time he saw it, he stood there petrified with fear. He says he felt that thing was staring at him, but the strange thing is that he could never see his face. Trying to figure out what that was, one day he reached out and turned on the light, but the thing vanished. He says he turned off the light and there it was. He turned it on and disappeared, and so on. He says that he used to see him just when he left the master bedroom towards the door that led to the patio. Now I understand why my grandma always slept with the light on. My cousin's wife says that one day she was in the bedroom asleep. She woke up in the middle of the night because she felt something strange. And right next to her was a black figure of a very tall stature. She was scared to death. She could not move, and so she lasted all night, immobilized until dawn. She says that she couldn't be alone in the house, that she felt something, especially if night came. She would like to go out and wait for my cousin to arrive because she couldn't be alone. It was something that terrified her so much. My grandma said that she saw 1,000 things. Among them, she said that she saw a black lump next to her that didn't let her sleep. She said that she didn't let her pray, that she tried and tried and she couldn't. She even fought with that evil entity, since she tried to pray and always interrupted her in one way or another. The years went by. We moved out of the house. Then other people lived there. Apparently, they also experienced countless strange events, apparitions. We never investigated anything about it. I wonder why evil was around our house. I have always had a recurring dream that I still have to this day. In my dream, I see the house destroyed. The roof is falling or that is flooded and you cannot go from one room to another. My mom has also had these same dreams even after many years of living that house. A few years ago, I found out that it was demolished and a new construction was made. I wonder if that thing is still there. If there was any energy left from the violence that was experienced there, or with those remodeling, all that was left behind. What lived there was something bad. For me, it was a demonic entity. But God always protected us. Although many unfortunate events had happened, in one way or another, God has always been protecting my family. If you liked the episode, please share it with someone you know loves paranormal or unexplained stories. Follow me on different podcast platforms to receive notifications whenever a new episode comes out. Follow me on social media where I share previews of new episodes before they are published. Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube as unexplained.enigma. Facebook, Chronicles of the Unexplained. Thanks for listening and see you all in the next unexplained story.